Now, did you know that bush poetry is regarded as one of the first forms of Australian pop culture? Our next guest knows it and loves it, from Snowy River to Clancy of the Overflow. Please welcome bush balladeer Don McQueen. Hello, thank you so much for joining us. Your story is fascinating. You're such a part of your community and you keep this bush poetry alive. Tell us about how you first started to love this kind of poetry.
Well, I was one of the lucky ones. When I was in grade 6, I was 11, like everyone else, and we had a wonderful teacher who encouraged the class to read Australian poetry from those wonderful school readers that some of these people might remember. They were so good, these school readers, they don't use them anymore. And it was just terrific. And he gave me that start. And what he was encouraging from the class fell on fertile soil with me.
Isn't it wonderful that you can love Australian poetry? We get so much poetry from overseas and the classics, you know, taught to us in schools. But I read Australian poetry to my daughter. I'd written him a letter that I had, want a better knowledge, sent to her. I met him down the Lachlan years ago. Clancy of the Overflow, I can still recite it. And I think it tells so many stories of our country. It's something that we can be so enormously proud of. And I'm loving that you're sharing it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, bush poetry, of course, had its beginnings with the old drovers, as they used to move their stock from the outback farms to the markets. And they could only move their stock, say, sometimes 10 or 12 miles a day. And at the end of the droving day, they'd firstly feed their dogs and their horses, and then get their campfire going to cook their own meals. And, of course, no television or radio, and they had to entertain themselves. And that gave birth to the Australian tall story connection and also the bush poetry. And since then, once that started, then others followed on. You know, there was the great writers that emerged, like Banjo Patterson, Henry Lawson, C.J. Dennis, John O'Brien, Mary Gilmore, Lindsay Gordon, all these people who wrote such wonderful, wonderful stuff that is now our heritage. And alas, alas, a lot of it's not taught in schools today.
Don, I'm just sitting here now, just going, this could be a poem, I wouldn't know, but I just can't stop looking at you and listening.
Yeah, you've got this beautiful rhythm to the way you speak. Is that due to, obviously, all the poetry that you read? And that was a way that they learnt it, wasn't it? Did that the way they learnt back then?
Yes.
In terms of, did the rhyming help? And
oh, absolutely. See, we developed our own style. See, we've developed our own ways in a lot of things. We play cricket differently than others. We've got our own accent, haven't we? We've got our own humour. We don't mind laughing at ourselves, but don't let anyone else laugh at us. So we've developed this our way. And sometimes if I'm reciting to a group of overseas people, I wonder why they don't seem to connect, because it's ours.
What's one of your favourites? What's one of your favourite Australian poems?
Well, I like all of Henry and Banjo, but see, Banjo Patterson had this unique genius of descriptiveness, which reflects in all of his poems. See, he was a very well-educated man. He was a university graduate.
It's very evocative, isn't it, Don?
Oh, yes.
Rather than talking about it, we're actually going to see and hear some of it. Don has chosen a piece to perform, especially for us and our Circle viewers. And I think if you've got ears, you'll notice that it is very Circle relevant. The poem that you're going to do is from Mulligan's Mob. Please put your hands together for the Bush Poet of the Year, Don McQueen.
Okay. Now, this poem is a 6-minute poem, so you'll be... Unfortunately, I won't be able to do the whole poem, but it's a story about a pioneer settler who married late in life to quite a young woman, and she eventually fell pregnant, and as the birth approached, he obtained his sister, who was a midwife, to come and assist in the outback property with the birthing. And of course, as what often happens, it was dark when this occurred, and no electricity again. So his job was to hold the lantern. Now I'm going to pick up the story after a baby has been born, a son, and it made old Mulligan very happy. But you'll see how the story unfolds. By the flickering light, they could see she was right, and they marvelled from one to the other. Then, "Push now, my love," and his wife gave a shove. Then old Mulligan's son had a brother. As the second son squealed, old Mulligan reeled. He was stunned by his wife's awesome plumbing. And quite unprepared, when the midwife declared, "I think there's another one coming." As old Mulligan looked, his wife's body shook and her face wore a trance-like expression. His sister said, "Pat, well, how about that?" As two daughters arrived in succession. Now, the next little while was recalled with a smile by his sister for many years after, and the Mulligan crew saw the joke in it too, though it very well near was a disaster. At the sight of 4 babies, all squealing and damp, lined up at the foot of the bed, old Mulligan turned and blew out the lamp, as if something had snapped in his head. But then, from the darkness, came his terrified roar as his wife gave a final contraction. "I've got 4 on the floor. I don't want any more. It must be the light that attracts them."
Join us shortly with his thoughts on the week's new releases, including Leonardo DiCaprio's new film J. Edgar. You're watching The Circle.
And the pub with no beer. And old Billy the blacksmith, the first time in his life, why he's